The Etherean world had always been a place of order and quiet routine. Cities floated in the sky like silver islands, connected by transparent walkways that shimmered under the light of their twin suns. The people moved with precision, their lives dictated by schedules, records, and the constant hum of machinery. Everything seemed calm, perfect, and predictable. But that morning, something extraordinary began to stir. In the central observatory of the capital, a young alien scholar had taken her place before the massive screen that displayed the universe beyond their world. She had a fascination with old transmissions, fragments of signal sent long ago from distant planets, some so faint that many dismissed them as myth. But she knew they were real. She had spent countless nights decoding them, translating them into a language her people could understand. And now she had stumbled across something different, something that made her pulse quicken, though she could not explain why. The transmission had been fragmented, a whisper from a world long believed lost. Her colleagues had told her she was wasting her time, that the humans were gone, that their civilizations had ended in some ancient disaster. But she had always felt there was more to the story. Something persistent in the signals suggested that they were trying to reach someone, somewhere. As she worked, she broadcasted her findings to the entire city. The citizens of Athiara gathered in their homes and public squares, turning their eyes and ears to her voice. She explained what she had discovered, showing images of long-abandoned human structures, faded records of their once vibrant cities, and translations of their messages. Her words were careful, precise, but filled with wonder. "We have found fragments of a world thought lost," she said. "These signals suggest that humans were not as primitive as we believed. Their knowledge, their technology, it may have been far greater than what we have ever seen." The audience listened in. "Oh," some whispered among themselves, marveling at the thought that a civilization they had dismissed as extinct might have left a lasting legacy. Others were skeptical, shaking their heads, unwilling to believe in legends. But all eyes remained on her as she continued describing what little she had learned. And then, without warning, everything changed. The screen flickered once, twice, then went dark. The observatory lights dimmed as a shadow passed over the twin suns. People looked outside, and what they saw made them freeze in disbelief. A massive object hovered above the capital, blocking the sunlight in a way no natural body ever could. It was not a moon, not an asteroid, not any known ship design. It was something else entirely. The young scholar froze mid-sentence, her voice cutting off in the middle of her explanation. The room was silent except for the low hum of the observatory's systems, which seemed to struggle against the presence above. Citizens pressed against their windows, their faces pale. The air itself felt heavier, charged with a tension that no one could name. Outside, the vessel did not move aggressively. It simply stayed there, hanging above their world as if watching. Its surface shimmered faintly, changing in ways that seemed almost alive. No one could detect any energy signature, no engines, no weapons, nothing familiar at all. It was as though the ship existed in its own dimension, touching Athiara but not fully part of it. For the first time in generations, fear and awe spread across the city in equal measure. People whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what they saw. Some believed it was a sign from the gods. Others feared an invasion. But the young scholar, still frozen before the screen, understood something the others did not. This ship was not here to attack. Its presence was deliberate, meaningful, and far beyond anything the Ethereans had ever encountered. She had studied enough human transmissions to recognize the markings on the vessel. Even through the distance and the strange shimmering of its surface, she could see them clearly. They were symbols she had only read about in ancient texts, symbols that had been recorded but long forgotten. It was the human insignia. A civilization that no one expected to exist any longer had returned, or perhaps it had never truly left. As the realization settled in, panic and excitement intertwined. The city's leaders called emergency meetings. Military fleets scrambled into orbit, but their sensors failed to detect anything beyond the faint shimmer of the ship. It was there, undeniably present, yet completely untouchable. Any attempts to communicate were met with silence. The ship did not respond, did not move, and yet its very presence dominated the skies. The young scholar, finally finding her voice, addressed the leaders. This is a human vessel," she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I do not know how it arrived or why, but the humans, the ones we thought were myths, they exist. And this ship, it is theirs." Questions flooded the room, but she could answer only a few. How had they returned? Why now? What did they want? No one knew. All she could do was watch as the vessel maintained its silent vigil above the capital, a reminder of a past civilization that was far more advanced than the Ethereans had ever imagined. Across the planet, ordinary citizens reacted in their own ways. Some fell to their knees in worship, believing this was a divine moment. Children pressed their faces against windows, staring in wonder at a ship that looked like nothing they had ever dreamed. Scientists and engineers scrambled to understand, recording every detail, analyzing every shimmer, every angle. The world had stopped, holding its collective breath. The young scholar could not tear her eyes away. Every fiber of her being was drawn to the ship, to the possibility it represented. Humanity had returned, and with it, a reminder that no matter how far one species might fall, or how lost their legacy might seem, they could rise again. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Hours passed. The ship remained in place, silent and unmoving. Etherean communication networks were jammed, unable to broadcast or record without interference from the mysterious vessel. Citizens began to speculate wildly. Some feared it would strike at any moment. Others hoped for a message, a sign, anything. That would explain why humans, so long thought gone, had appeared above their world. In the observatory, the young scholar continued her work, attempting to decode any signal the ship might emit. Her hands moved over ancient consoles, running simulations, checking every possible transmission frequency. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she noticed a pattern, a faint pulse, a rhythm that seemed deliberate. She leaned closer, her heart pounding, her mind racing. "This is not random," she whispered. "It's a message. They are trying to tell us something." Her colleagues looked at her skeptically. How could they send a message when no one could detect a signal? But she ignored their doubt, focusing entirely on the faint traces she had found. Every pulse, every shimmer of light seemed to carry meaning, and she knew that if anyone could understand it, she could. As the sun set behind the silhouette of the vessel, casting long shadows across the city, the people of Athiara could only watch. No one slept. No one ate. Everyone was waiting, holding their breath, knowing that something profound had arrived in their skies. A single human vessel, suspended above their world, and with it, the return of a civilization they had long believed, lost to time. And for the first time in her life, the young scholar realized that the stories she had studied, the fragments she had pieced together, were not just legends. Humanity had survived. They had returned. And in their silent presence above the planet, they carried a warning, a promise, and perhaps an invitation that no one could yet understand. As night fell and the city glimmered beneath the stars, one thing became clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The world of Athiara had been touched by something extraordinary, something that could not be explained, and the young scholar knew that her life and the fate of her people was about to change forever. After the first shock of seeing the human vessel, the world of Athiara had plunged into confusion and fear. The city had fallen silent under the ship's shadow, and the people didn't know whether to panic or to watch in awe. The young scholar, still standing before the screens of the observatory, tried to explain what little she knew, but her words barely reached anyone. The sight of the vessel above the city had silenced even the most confident voices. For hours, no one dared move. Military fleets were ordered to prepare for action, but their weapons could not lock onto the ship. Sensors failed. Energy scanners returned impossible readings. The vessel seemed to exist in a state that the Ethereans had never encountered before. It moved, yet it did not move. It hovered, yet it had no visible engines. It was present, yet untouchable. The leaders of Athiara were in a crisis meeting, their faces pale with tension. They had ruled for generations with confidence in their technology, but here was something beyond their understanding. The council debated furiously. "We must attack," one said. "We cannot allow an unknown presence above our capital." Another argued we should attempt communication first. "This may be a test or a warning or something we cannot even imagine." The young scholar insisted on a calm approach. She reminded them of the ancient human transmissions she had studied. Humans, she explained, were not just clever. They were unpredictable and dangerous in ways the Aetherians could not measure. She urged caution. The council listened, but fear had already spread through the room. They ordered every defense system into standby, but none of their weapons responded. It was as though the ship existed in a different set of rules, ignoring their technology entirely. Across the city, ordinary citizens reacted in different ways. Some fled, screaming as though the ship would strike at any moment. Others gathered to watch, unable to tear their eyes away. Children climbed to rooftops, pressing their small faces against the barriers to get a better view. The air was thick with tension mixed with wonder and fear. For the first time in living memory, the people of Athiara had no idea what would happen next. The young scholar returned to her work, studying every possible signal, every faint pulse of light that the ship emitted. She began to notice something strange. The ship was not silent. It was sending out tiny, almost imperceptible signals, faint pulses that moved like a pattern across the sky. Most people could not see them, but her trained eyes could. She realized that the ship was sending a message, but it was unlike anything she had ever encountered. She worked through the night, decoding what little information she could capture. The pulses were not words in any Aetherian language. They were rhythms almost musical in nature, yet precise, deliberate. Each beat seemed to convey something, a pattern that demanded careful attention. She tried to translate it, but it was difficult. It was unlike any communication system known to her people. While she worked, the city remained in a state of tension. The military had formed a perimeter around the capital, but no one dared take action. Every ship in orbit was scanning the vessel, yet nothing could detect its engines, its weapons, or its intentions. The alien girl's colleagues began to murmur doubts, some even accusing her of imagining patterns where none existed, but she ignored them. She felt certain, somewhere in those faint pulses was a human voice, a message meant for them. As the sun began to rise again, casting long shadows across the floating city, the people noticed something even more extraordinary. Small faint lights began to appear on the surface of the vessel. They flickered and shifted, forming shapes that resembled letters, but letters from a language long forgotten. The council rushed to the observatory as the young scholar pointed out the patterns. It was proof the humans were trying to communicate, excitement mixed with fear. The idea that humans were not extinct but returned was almost too much for the leaders to comprehend. The vessel hovered silently, and the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the message to become clear. The young scholar continued her decoding. Using every tool available, she analyzed the pulses, the flickering lights, even the faint energy that the ship emitted. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, words perhaps, symbols possibly, but whatever it was meant to convey information, a warning, a greeting, or both. She could not yet be sure. Outside, the people of Aethera began to speculate. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed the humans had returned to reclaim the galaxy. Others thought it was a punishment for their ancestors' arrogance, a test of the civilization's morality. Still, a few whispered that the humans had returned simply to observe, studying Aethera the way humans once studied other worlds long ago. Meanwhile, the council decided to take a careful step forward. They activated every available long-range communication channel, sending greetings, questions, and warnings in the hope that the humans would respond. But nothing came back, at least nothing that could be detected by normal sensors. The vessel remained silent, hovering above the city like a giant living shadow. The alien girl focused on the subtle patterns once more. She realized that the signals were not meant to be heard, not in the conventional sense. They were visual, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, and they contained something more than words. Intelligence, intention, a presence that could not be fully measured. It was as though the humans were not speaking to machines. They were speaking directly to the minds of those who were paying attention. Hours passed. Days, almost. The city continued under the silent watch of the vessel. Life went on, but differently. People moved cautiously, with an awareness that they were being observed by something far beyond their understanding. Markets, schools, and workplaces carried on, but every eye occasionally lifted to the sky. Conversations often turned to speculation, fear, and wonder. Then finally, something shifted. The pulses from the vessel began to change, forming shapes and lines that resembled the outlines of buildings, oceans, and landscapes. The young scholar recognized the forms immediately. It was Earth. The humans were showing them their home world, transformed, glowing with energy, alive in a way Aethera could not imagine. Gasps filled the observatory. Leaders, scholars, and citizens stared at the projections in disbelief. Earth had not died. Humans had not vanished. Instead, they had changed, evolved beyond the forms known to history. The images suggested cities made of light, oceans shimmering with metal-like patterns, forests glowing with energy. Humanity had not just survived, they had become something new, something beyond the imagination of the Aetherans. The young scholar felt her heart race. The evidence was undeniable. The humans were real. The vessel was theirs. And whatever had happened to them, whatever transformation they had undergone, it was clear that they had returned not to attack, but to show the world what had become of them. The council was stunned. Plans for defense were abandoned, replaced by a sense of awe and caution. No one knew what to do, but one thing became clear. The humans were no longer part of their past, they were part of the present, and perhaps the future. The city slept uneasily that night, every citizen aware that something extraordinary had touched their lives. Children dreamed of distant worlds, their imaginations fired by visions of the glowing human Earth. Adults debated endlessly what the appearance meant, and the young scholar, still studying the vessel, realized that this was only the beginning. The human vessel above their world was more than a ship. It was a message, a warning, and perhaps an invitation. The humans had returned and they were watching. And for the people of Aethera, life would never be the same again. Even as the night deepened, the ship remained, silent but present. It had arrived without warning, without threat, yet it carried the weight of something beyond comprehension. The young scholar understood that they were witnessing history, the return of a civilization that many had written off as extinct, but one that had evolved into something far greater than anyone could imagine. And for the first time in generations, the people of Aethera felt the humbling weight of their own smallness in the vast universe, as a single human vessel held the sky above them in quiet, impossible command. The days after the human vessel appeared were tense and strange for the people of Aethera. Life continued, but it felt different. Every conversation, every decision, every glance toward the sky reminded them of the silent ship hovering above their world. It was a constant presence, impossible to ignore, and no one knew what it wanted. The young scholar remained at the observatory, tirelessly analyzing the faint signals the vessel sent. By now she had become obsessed with understanding them. Each pulse, each flicker of light seemed to carry intelligence, a kind of thought that was alien yet familiar. She had shared some of her findings with the council, but most of the leaders were impatient. They wanted answers, explanations, control. But she knew that humans, if they truly had returned, could not be understood in the way Aethera had always understood the universe. One morning, the council decided to make a formal attempt at communication. They opened all channels and sent greetings, signals of peace, and repeated messages asking the humans to identify themselves. Every message was carefully crafted, polite, precise. The council hoped that if the humans were willing to respond, they would do so in a way that could be measured, but nothing happened. No response came, at least not in any way the Aetherans could detect with their usual instruments. The vessel remained in place, silent and untouchable. The people began to murmur doubts, wondering whether the humans even noticed their attempts. The young scholar, however, paid close attention. She could sense a change in the vessel's energy. The faint pulses had shifted slightly, forming patterns she had not seen before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she recognized it immediately. "They are listening," she told the council. They are aware of us. They are choosing how to respond. Her words caused both relief and fear. If the humans were aware, what were they thinking? Were they hostile? Were they curious? Or were they judging the Aetherians in ways that could not be predicted? The council debated for hours, but no one could agree. Every option seemed uncertain, every choice dangerous. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens of Aethera were beginning to notice strange phenomena. Animals behaved oddly, crops in certain areas glowed faintly under the vessel's presence, and even the city's energy systems experienced subtle shifts. Scientists and engineers were baffled. There was no explanation for why the humans' ship should affect the planet in these ways. It was as if the vessel itself carried influence, not just intelligence, and it extended far beyond its visible presence. At the observatory, the young scholar had discovered something extraordinary. She realized that the vessel was projecting a faint image, almost like a hologram across the city. It was subtle at first, a shimmer in the atmosphere, barely noticeable unless one looked carefully. But when she focused on it, she saw forms, symbols, and shapes that suggested a message. It was as if the humans were not speaking in words but in patterns and images meant to be understood visually, mentally, almost intuitively. The first clear image appeared one evening as the twin suns began to set. Across the sky, faint outlines formed: buildings, cities, forests, oceans. The young scholar gasped as she recognized them. These were not the planet Aethera. They were showing Earth. The humans were sending images of their homeworld, transformed beyond imagination. Oceans glimmered metallic blue, cities glowed with energy, and forests pulsed with light. Humanity had not died. They had evolved. The council watched in stunned silence. Their earlier fear began to mix with awe. The humans, it seemed, were showing them something they wanted them to see, but the meaning was unclear. Was it a warning? A display of power? A lesson? Or perhaps something else entirely? No one could be sure, but the realization settled heavily. Over the room, humanity was alive, and it was far beyond anything the Aetherians had ever imagined. The young scholar continued her work, decoding smaller, subtler patterns hidden within the larger images. She discovered a rhythm in the lights, a sequence that repeated across the projections. It was like a heartbeat, deliberate and measured, almost as if the humans were saying, "We are here, we are real, and we are watching." She realized that the humans had not returned to attack. They had returned to communicate, to observe, to remind the universe that they still existed. That night, the city below her observatory remained awake. Families gathered in open areas, children pointing at the shimmering sky, adults whispering theories and possibilities. Some believed the humans had returned to offer knowledge, to guide civilizations like theirs. Others feared it was a test, a warning of something terrible if they failed to understand. The air was heavy with tension, mixed with wonder. The next morning, the vessel revealed something even more astonishing. Faint beams of light shot from its surface, scanning the planet. These beams were harmless but deliberate. They moved slowly, sweeping over landscapes, forests, mountains, and rivers. Observers noted that the beams seemed to avoid harm, as if the ship were studying the planet rather than threatening it. The young scholar realized that the humans were mapping Aethera, observing every detail of its surface. "They are learning about us," she said quietly, "not to destroy but to understand." The council was skeptical. They had faced invasions, threats, and cosmic anomalies before, but nothing like this. A ship that could appear silently, that could resist all detection and weapons, and that chose to study rather than attack. It was beyond their understanding. Yet the young scholar's words carried weight. She had studied humans more than anyone else in Aethera, and she had learned that their intelligence, their strategy, and their perspective were unlike any other civilization in the galaxy. As the days passed, the human vessel continued its silent observation. The young scholar noticed another change. The faint images of Earth began to include humans themselves, not as they had been long ago, but as they had become. They were taller, more graceful, their forms shimmering with energy. Their cities were alive in ways Ethera could not replicate. Machines moved seamlessly with nature, energy flowed without waste, and every aspect of life seemed designed with intention. It was both beautiful and unsettling. The images carried a message, though the words were not clear. The young scholar translated what she could, using patterns, rhythms, and intuition. Slowly, a phrase began to emerge. We are not gone. We watch. We learn. We warn. The meaning was chilling. The humans were sending a reminder. They were here, they had evolved, and the Aetherians' actions were being observed. Every decision, every expansion, every war could be noted, studied, and judged by beings far beyond their comprehension. For the first time, fear took hold. Not of attack, but of underestimation. The Aetherians realized that humanity's return changed everything. No longer were they a distant myth. No longer were they a civilization of the past. They were alive, present, and far more capable than anyone had imagined. The young scholar, exhausted but determined, worked late into the night. She began to develop a system to better understand the signals. Using every tool at her disposal, she tried to translate the rhythms into something comprehensible. She found that the pulses carried patterns of thought, sequences that suggested intelligence and intention far beyond Ethera's current knowledge. It was as though the humans were speaking directly to minds capable of observation, not just instruments. In the observatory, she realized that the humans were testing her. The vessel's messages were not simple. They were designed to make the observer think, to push the limits of understanding, to see if they were worthy of comprehension. And she felt a weight she had never felt before, a responsibility that stretched beyond her own life. She was the link between the humans and her people, and her ability to understand could determine how Ethera responded to this incredible, unprecedented event. As the first moon of the planet rose into the night sky, the human vessel remained above, silent, immovable, yet pulsing with quiet life. Across the city, citizens whispered in fear and awe. Children dreamt of distant glowing cities. Adults wondered what humanity had become, and the council debated endlessly what to do next. The young scholar knew one thing for certain. The humans had returned not for conquest, not for war, but to remind the galaxy that they were alive, that they had evolved, and that they were watching. The vessel was a signal, a warning, and perhaps an invitation all in one. And the question that weighed on everyone's mind was the same. What would humanity do next? And as the night deepened, the young scholar understood that their world, and indeed their entire civilization, would never be the same again. Humanity was no longer part of myth or history. They were part of the present, and the future of Ethera depended on how they would respond to a species that had returned from the past stronger, wiser, and far beyond their imagination. Days passed, and the human vessel remained above Ethera, silent yet impossible to ignore. Every citizen of the floating city and every observer across the planet could feel its presence, even if no one could fully understand it. The young scholar spent nearly every moment at the observatory, analyzing the faint pulses, flickers, and patterns the vessel emitted. She had become obsessed with understanding its purpose, and with every passing hour, she uncovered small hints that something far greater was unfolding. The first real revelation came on a morning when the twin suns rose, painting the sky with soft orange light. The faint pulses from the vessel shifted again, forming complex patterns across the atmosphere. The patterns were larger, clearer, and this time, almost unmistakable. Shapes began to appear, cities, oceans, mountains, and continents, but these were not Ethera. They were Earth, yet it was unlike the Earth anyone remembered from history. The young scholar leaned closer to her instruments, her heart racing. She could see energy flowing through the land, cities glowing with a strange light, and forests alive in ways that seemed almost impossible. Rivers shimmered as if made of liquid metal, and mountains pulsed with faint energy. Humanity had transformed itself, merging life and technology in ways Athiara had never imagined. Their civilization was no longer purely biological. It was a fusion of organic life, energy, and machines, all in harmony. As the images spread across the sky, citizens of Athiara gathered to watch. Some were terrified, unsure how to process what they were seeing. Others were filled with awe and excitement. For the first time, they realized that humans were not a species of the past. They had evolved far beyond what anyone could imagine. The vessel above was not a weapon of destruction. It was a window, a message, a demonstration of what humanity had become. The council called an emergency meeting, and the young scholar presented her findings. "This is not just observation," she said, pointing to the flickering images. "They are showing us their world. They want us to understand that they exist and that they are far beyond our expectations. This is a demonstration of power, yes, but also a warning." The leaders listened, their skepticism mixed with fear. They could not deny what they were seeing. Their sensors, their instruments, and their eyes all confirmed it. Humans had returned, but they were not what anyone expected. They were not primitive, vulnerable, or lost. They had evolved into something almost godlike, a civilization that could manipulate energy and matter in ways Athiara could barely comprehend. While the council debated, the young scholar focused on the faint pulses and flickers again. She noticed subtle changes in the patterns, sequences that suggested intelligence beyond any language. It was almost as if the humans were speaking directly to the mind, bypassing words entirely. Thoughts, intentions, and emotions seemed to flow through the patterns, forming a message that could be understood only by those who paid close attention. Hours passed as she worked, decoding the sequences bit by bit. And then it became clear. The humans were not merely showing their civilization, they were sending a warning. A warning about the universe, about progress, and about power. Their message was simple yet chilling. "We watched what came before. Do not repeat the mistakes. Civilization can rise, but it can fall. We are here, and we remember." The words, though abstract, struck fear into the hearts of the council members. They realized that humanity's return was not an invitation. It was a reminder of something far greater, that humans had survived countless dangers, evolved beyond limitations, and now possessed knowledge and power that dwarfed anything Athiara had achieved. The young scholar explained further. "They are showing us what they became after humanity was almost destroyed. They learned, adapted, and transformed. Their message is clear. Evolution is not just survival. It is understanding, foresight, and harmony. And they are watching how we handle our world." The council struggled to grasp the implications. Their defense systems, their fleets, their energy networks, all seemed inadequate when measured against the intelligence of a species that could project itself across the stars and manipulate energy on a planetary scale. Even their most advanced technology felt primitive. Meanwhile, across the planet, ordinary citizens continued to watch in awe. Streets emptied as people gathered in open areas to witness the vessel's displays. Families huddled together, children pointing at the glowing images in the sky. Scholars and engineers took notes feverishly, trying to understand the technology behind the display. Everywhere the reaction was the same: awe, fear, and a sense that the universe had changed in a single moment. The human vessel remained perfectly still, yet every flicker, every pulse, every sequence carried weight. It was as if the ship itself were alive, aware of every observation, every thought, every reaction. People began to speak of it not as a machine, but as a living entity, something that thought and judged, something that could see not only the world but the hearts of those who inhabited it. The young scholar realized that this was the first true contact with humanity since they had disappeared. Not a war, not diplomacy, not treaties, just an observation and a message that reached deeper than words. The humans had returned to remind the galaxy that survival was not enough. Knowledge, understanding, and foresight were the keys to lasting civilization. As the day turned to night, the vessel projected something even more profound. It was a human figure, enormous yet delicate, appearing in the sky above the capital. The figure shimmered with energy, its form both humanoid and otherworldly. It did not speak, but its presence was commanding. Every citizen of Aethera could feel its awareness, its intelligence, and its power. The young scholar understood immediately. This was not just a display. It was a demonstration of what humanity had become. They were no longer simply biological beings. They had evolved into something far greater, combining mind, body, and energy in perfect harmony. Their form, their power, and their presence were a warning and an inspiration at the same time. The council was silent, struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. They had prepared for invasion, for diplomacy, for all manners of events, but nothing could prepare them for this. Humans were no longer part of the past. They were part of the present, and their influence extended far beyond what anyone could measure. In the observatory, the young scholar continued to analyze the flickers, the pulses, and the sequences. She realized that the humans were not sending a simple message, they were teaching. Every projection, every pattern, every image was a lesson in survival, in evolution, in foresight. They were showing Aethera what could be achieved if civilization understood its potential and its responsibilities. The city below remained captivated, frozen under the silent watch of the vessel. Families, children, workers, and scholars all stared at the sky, unable to look away. There was a sense of collective awe and respect, as if the presence above demanded it. It was clear to everyone that humanity had returned not to conquer, but to remind and to warn. As the night deepened, the young scholar felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope, because humanity had survived and evolved, proving that life could overcome unimaginable odds. Fear, because the reminder carried a warning. Power and progress without understanding could lead to destruction. Humanity's return was a lesson that the galaxy could not ignore. The vessel finally receded slightly, still hovering above, but the projections became subtler, almost like a fading memory. The images of Earth slowly disappeared, leaving only the presence of the enormous human figure shimmering faintly in the night sky. Citizens watched, realizing that what they had witnessed was extraordinary and permanent. Their world, their understanding of the universe and their place in it had changed in ways that could not be undone. The young scholar looked at the vessel and whispered to herself, "They are teaching us. They are warning us. And we must listen, or we will fail." And for the people of Aethera, that night marked the beginning of a new understanding. Humanity was no longer a distant legend, a myth from the past. It was alive, present, and far beyond anything they could imagine. The human vessel, silent yet commanding, had brought a revelation that would echo across generations. Survival was not enough. Civilization must evolve, learn, and understand, or it would repeat the mistakes of the past. For the first time, the city slept with awareness. They were no longer just inhabitants of Aethera. They were observers of a power that had transcended time, a presence that reminded them that the universe was far larger, stranger, and wiser than they had ever believed. And above them, the human vessel remained, a silent sentinel, a teacher, and a warning, proof that humanity had returned not to fight but to show what was possible. The days after the human vessel's display above Aethera were filled with unease, curiosity, and a sense of awe. Citizens still gazed upward at the skies, wondering what the humans would do next, while the council debated endlessly on how to respond. No one could deny the power and intelligence of the species that had returned. No one could dismiss what they had seen. And yet, fear lingered. Fear not of attack, but of being measured, judged, and found lacking. The young scholar, however, felt a different calling. She had spent her life studying ancient human transmissions, imagining their cities, their ways, their ambitions. And now, after witnessing the vessel and the projections of humanity's transformed Earth, she knew she could not remain idle. She could not simply observe from a distance while the true humans, the ones who had evolved beyond imagination, hovered above her world. She had to understand them directly. The council warned her against acting alone. "It is too dangerous," they said. "You do not know what you are asking. This is beyond any mission we have attempted." But the scholar argued that the humans had left a message, a path subtle yet deliberate, showing her that they wanted to be understood, that they had prepared for someone to reach them. They might have chosen to observe, but she had the ability to follow the signals. And so, despite their warnings, she prepared a small craft to leave Aethera and venture into the region the humans had indicated. The ship she chose was old by Aetheran standards, a vessel designed for observation rather than speed or combat. But the scholar had modified it, using every piece of knowledge she had gathered about human technology from their ancient transmissions. It would not defend her against attack, nor could it travel as fast as a fleet vessel, but it would be sufficient for this delicate journey. Her heart raced as she boarded, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She was no longer a scholar on her world. She was a messenger, an observer, and perhaps a student of a species far beyond her understanding. As she launched, the city below watched with a mixture of hope and fear. The twin suns glimmered off the ship's surface as it moved into orbit, leaving the familiar gravity of Aethera behind. Her instruments immediately picked up the faint energy patterns that the humans had left, almost like a trail leading her forward. The signals were subtle, pulsing rhythmically, guiding her through the empty darkness of space. She followed them carefully, never rushing, understanding that every movement mattered. The first days of the journey were quiet and lonely. Stars stretched endlessly around her, distant points of light that offered both guidance and perspective. She reflected on what she had seen, humanity's transformation, their warning, their presence above her world. Questions swirled in her mind. What had happened to humans to make them so advanced? What had they learned that Aethera had not? And most importantly, what did they want from her world, and from the galaxy? Then, almost imperceptibly, at first she noticed a change in the signals. The energy pulses grew stronger, more defined, forming shapes that seemed to interact with her ship. It was as if the humans were aware of her approach, guiding her path, teaching her how to follow them safely. The scholar's heart pounded. She realized that this journey was more than a mission. It was a test, one that required focus, understanding, and trust in the signals she had deciphered. As she approached the coordinates embedded in the pulses, a strange phenomenon occurred. The ship's instruments began to fail in a subtle way. Navigation systems flickered, energy readings became erratic, and even communication channels with Aethera experienced interference. At first, fear gripped her. Was she being led into danger? Had she misread the signals? But then she remembered the lessons from the vessel above her world. Humanity did not act recklessly. Their presence, their signals, and their demonstrations were deliberate. This interference was not a trap. It was a lesson, teaching her patience, perception, and trust. Hours later, she entered a region of space unlike anything she had ever seen. Stars seemed to shimmer differently, as if reality itself was bending. Energy patterns twisted and flowed, forming invisible pathways that guided her forward. The ship's instruments struggled to interpret the environment, yet the pulses from the humans remained steady, unwavering, and clear. It was as if they existed partially in a dimension beyond ordinary comprehension, and she was beginning to glimpse that reality. Finally, she arrived at the source of the signals. There, suspended in the void, was a structure unlike any ship she had ever imagined. It was enormous yet delicate, and it shimmered with energy that seemed alive. The surface was fluid, changing constantly, reflecting the void and yet projecting patterns that her mind could barely comprehend. This was not just a vessel. It was a living extension of the humans themselves, a fusion of technology, energy, and consciousness. The scholar felt a mix of awe and fear as she approached. Her instruments detected intelligence, pure, active, deliberate intelligence, and it seemed to reach directly into her mind. Thoughts, emotions, and images flashed across her consciousness. The humans had survived unimaginable challenges, had evolved beyond biology, and had learned to manipulate energy, matter, and perception itself. She realized that this was the culmination of their journey, the manifestation of what they had become over millennia. Then she understood why they had sent her. The vessel above Athiara had not been a threat. It had been an invitation. The humans wanted her to witness, to learn, and to understand their existence. They were testing her perception, patience, and capacity to comprehend a civilization far beyond her own. Every signal, every pulse, every projection had prepared her for this moment. As she moved closer, the human structure emitted a subtle pattern of energy that enveloped her ship. It was not dangerous. It was gentle, almost like a hand guiding her forward. The scholar felt herself lifted into a sense of connection with the humans. Their intelligence was not alien in the sense of being hostile. It was alien in its depth, clarity, and scope. She could sense their history, their struggles, their triumphs, and their purpose. Hours passed as she hovered near the structure. The humans communicated not with words but with experience. Visions of their evolution, of their challenges, and of their successes unfolded in her mind. She saw humanity struggling against extinction, adapting to catastrophic events, and rising again. She saw their cities of light, their mastery over energy, and the harmony they had achieved between life and technology. The human vessel above Athiara had been a message, and now she was living it firsthand. And then the message became clearer. Images of Athiara appeared, projected into her mind. The humans were showing her world as it was, as it could become, and as it could fail. Their warning was simple. Power without wisdom leads to ruin. Civilization must grow with understanding, foresight, and balance. They were not there to conquer, and they were not there to destroy. They were there to teach. The scholar realized that this was more than a journey. It was a responsibility. She had been chosen to witness humanity's transformation, to learn from it, and to carry that understanding back to her people. The humans had prepared this lesson carefully, guiding her step by step, ensuring that she could comprehend the depth and scope of what they had become. Time seemed to lose meaning. As she absorbed the lessons, she saw patterns of thought, designs of cities, flows of energy, and the evolution of consciousness itself. Humanity had survived, not by brute force, but by adaptation, intelligence, and harmony. And now, they were guardians of knowledge that no other civilization could yet wield responsibly. Finally, as the pulses of energy from the structure stabilized, the scholar felt a sense of completion. She had seen the truth. Humanity had not vanished. They had transformed. They had returned not for conquest, but for observation, guidance, and warning. And she had been allowed to witness it firsthand, chosen to understand their presence and carry that knowledge back to her world. With a deep breath, she prepared her ship to return to Athiara. The journey back felt different. The signals now acted as a guide, leading her safely through the void. She understood the humans' intention more clearly now. They had sent her not as an emissary, but as a student, someone capable of understanding the lessons of survival, evolution, and wisdom. As Athiara's twin suns came into view once more, the scholar realized that nothing would ever be the same. She had glimpsed humanity at its highest, and she carried with her a responsibility greater than any mission she had ever undertaken. The lessons of the humans were clear. Evolution, knowledge, and foresight were the keys to lasting civilization. And her people would have to heed them, or risk repeating the mistakes of the past. Hovering above her world, the scholar looked at the human vessel that had returned to orbit, faintly shimmering as if observing her, guiding her safely home. She understood that the humans were patient, deliberate, and wise beyond measure. They did not need to conquer, and they did not need to dominate. Their presence was a reminder, a lesson, and a warning. And for the first time, she felt the true weight of humanity's return, not as a force of war, but as a teacher of the universe itself.